Hey listeners, how are you all? Thank you so much for being our awesome members. There's a lot to come more. Sit tight, be comfy, put your headphones, now let's begin. Knowing me, knowing you. The brand new Team 10 had decided to take their lunches outside to enjoy them under the cheery sun and the serenely clean blue sky. The day was peaceful, and they took their time to enjoy it. Eating slowly as they watched the fluffy white clouds amble on overhead. Though Shikamaru was still opposed to having two girls on his team, he knew there was no use complaining. Hinata didn't bother him because she hardly ever spoke. But Naruto 1/4 she could prove troublesome in the future 1/4. Little did he know that things were about to become a lot worse 1/4. Several hours before Iruka's speech, Mitarashi Anko was currently at home. She had already waved off her younger sister, whom had become quite annoying with her bubbling excitement, going so far as to even run leave home early to meet up with her new sensei. It was decidedly un-Naruto. Anko would have all the time in the world to have a nice relaxing day though, seeing there were no scheduled missions to perform for a good while. She lounged against the comfortable leather of a nearly desiccated armchair, stretching as though she were a feline, and released a lazy yawn and smacked her lips loudly 1/4 the length. Felt really good against her net-clothed back. Yep, a nice, year-long nap sounded good right about now 1/4. Too bad a polite knock at her front door brought any budding ideas of sleep and dream mole. Esting a certain teacher Chunin to a screeching halt. Grumbling slightly about the fact that someone actually had the gall to ruin what could have been a perfect day, Anko ran her fingers through her hair before getting up from the only comfortable armchair that had survived Naruto's moving into the house. Slowly, determined to let the somewhat unwelcome visitor wait for a little while, Anko made her way to the front door, picking up a randomly strewn overcoat in the process. If it was a male visitor, well, she didn't need any more blood in her household and possibly blemishing her tanned skin. When she finally did arrive, she grasped the doorknob and swung it open with enough force to display her agitation. "What do ya want, punk?" she demanded angrily, not even looking at the intruder who had so ruined her afternoon 1/4. "Good to see you too." She had heard this voice before. The strong, kind sound of age that carried power. A baritone voice that held a small tinge of amusement. A voice that definitely belonged to the Hokage himself. Hokage-sama. Anko looked down at the smaller man and was taken completely by mouth hung open. She had never even thought herself important enough to warrant a visit from the Hokage. It wasn't every day that the leader of your village stood at your front door after all. Remembering her manners, she invited him in. "Please, come in." She moving out of the way to allow him entry to her home. "Hello my dear, and thank you." The older man tipped the rim of his triangular hat with his fingers. His smile flashed brightly, and stepped inside. "Please take a seat in the living room, I'll be right with you." Anko mentally slapped herself. Even at her present age, this man was still able to make her as nervous as a newly graduated genin. After sending him on his way, she hurried towards the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "If it isn't too much trouble," he called back, mirth dancing on the tip of his tongue. Immediately she set out to make some tea. A loud clatter of ceramics and small teaspoons filled the air soon after, followed closely by a desperate cry of steam escaping the narrow nozzle of a teapot. With slight hesitance, she placed it, the cups, and two small saucers with sugar cubes and tea bags piled on top of them respectively, on a large tray. She wondered what the old man might want with her. She stopped dead in her tracks as realization hit her. Mizuki. Iruka had told her that he would not press charges of any kind against her little sister. Had Sandaime maybe changed his mind? Would she be? Anko forcefully rid herself of those thoughts and hurried towards the living room, slamming the doors of two lower cabinets shut with her foot, all the while still balancing the tray perfectly. As she entered the room, she saw the third seated on the large sofa at the far edge of the living room, perfectly at ease with everything around him. The robes he wore slid down his body like malleable silk. His body seemed almost predatory, as if he could leap into action at any moment. Anko let out a short breath she hadn't known she was holding as the man beamed up towards her, sliding high. Fingertips over the hat that was placed next to him. She set the tray on the table that stood in the center of the living room, pouring his tea and offering it to him 2 cubes of sugar. He didn't Want to ruin his teeth any more than he already had before pouring herself some as well. So, she started softly, stirring the contents of her cup with a small teaspoon as she sat herself back into her comfortable armchair. What did you want to talk to me about, Hokage-sama? She sipped her tea, savoring its underlying bitterness, and tried not to look too anxious. I need you to teach a team of genin. His voice was flat, clear-cut. The tea that was still in her mouth quite suddenly found itself spewed out dramatically. The spray still hung in the air as her brown eyes widened to dinner plates. What? She spluttered in surprise and shock. There is a team of new graduates that I need you to teach. He smiled benignly, clearly amused at her antics. No way, she protested adamantly, placing her cup on the table just to make sure there wouldn't be any more mishaps. No way in hell, old man. All respect had clearly been thrown out the window. Now, don't be like that, Anko. The wrinkled face of the third beamed at her again. If I remember correctly, you told me you'd do anything to repay that debt you owed me. Damn. Anko's eyebrow twitched involuntarily as she averted her face and grimaced. The third stood up in a ruffling of robes and placed his hat back on his head. Anko didn't pay him any mind. TCH. I knew that was gonna come and bite me in the ass someday 1/4. Besides, we're lacking a Junin instructor. Yuhi Kurenai-san wanted to wait another year before taking on the challenge of teaching a team youngsters like Naruto. He explained, taking off his hat and rubbing his scalp absent-mindedly. An uncomfortable silence followed until he spoke up again. Anko, he started slowly, giving her a meaningful look. You are the only one who really understands her 1/4. You are the only one who can control her if. Don't say it, the woman said resolutely, slicing through the air with her hand as if to literally cut off the man's sentence. I don't want to hear it. There's no way that will happen. She hesitated for a moment, her angry frown that had appeared dying down to an expressionless look. The third stared at her, almost expecting or knowing her answer. I'll do it. Her slowly spreading smirk matched his benign smile. Just don't come crying to me when she kicks your butt and becomes Hokage. Oh, Sarutobi smiled broadly now and couldn't suppress a chuckle. I'll be looking forward to the day I can finally sit down and rest my weary bones. Anko only let out a boisterous laugh, nodding to herself, all the while suppressing her anxious dread. Arg, where are they? Naruto asked for what seemed the 100th time. Her classmates glared at her, clearly annoyed. I don't know, so stop asking, Sakura replied hotly, throwing the girl a furious glare that made Naruto even more agitated. I wasn't asking you, Pinky. The blonde shot back, pointing a finger toward Sakura as she spoke. Huffing, Sakura turned around and plunked down onto one of the now numerous empty benches. Inner Sakura must have been plenty pissed. Naruto was in a similar state. Sans inner personality, of course. They had been waiting now for a good 3 hours. Waiting for who knows what to arrive and introduce themselves, and it was rapidly growing old. Pipe down, Willia. Over in a far corner, Inuzuka Kiba was seated on the ground. Mock wrestling with his pet and apparent best friend Akamaru. The small puppy snapped at his master's fingers playfully. Kiba whisked them past his maw only to have the pup snap at them again. Naruto shot him another of Anko's patented death stares before Akamaru barked his assent to the boy's statement. Quote. As always, the genius of the Uchiha clan, Uchiha Sasuke, sat removed from his classmates. He was the picture-perfect Bishonen, brooding and angsty, giving wave after wave of, I am better than you, praise me for the littlest thing, while covering the lower half of his face with his interlaced fingers. Naruto grimaced towards the back of his head. His oddly parakeet-shaped head, the thought made her stifle a fit of giggles. At the sound of her laughter, the Bishi prince turned back to look at her. Naruto offered him a smirk. After whispering something she couldn't hear, he turned back to contemplate his dark soul. He was probably wasting his time by thinking about the many ways his new teammates would slow him down, anyways. Bastard. Naruto's searching look fell onto her new teammate. The laziest genin alive, it seemed. He was actually lying on his back on the teacher's desk. For God's sake, Nara Shikamaru. Currently, his eyes were closed. He made no movements save for the rhythmic, almost serene rise and fall of his chest. Every breath, rise. Every release, fall. It became somewhat hypnotic. In other words, Shikamaru was fast asleep. Naruko stared at him with a bemused expression before sauntering over to her own best friend, Hinata. Naruko lowered herself onto the bench next to her blue-haired friend and heaved a heavy sigh. So, Hinata-chan, who do you think will be our new teacher? Hinata shook her head gently and folded her hands in her lap. The girl seemed to be nervous, again. I don't know. The blonde girl tapped her chin, then grinned broadly. Well, at least we didn't get that chimney guy. Hinata looked at her, only to see Naruko smiling a broad, reminiscing smile. Did you see the look on Ino's face? By chimney guy, Naruko meant one of the teachers that had actually managed to arrive on time. She wasn't completely sure, but, though it was someone called Sarutobi Asuma. Her older sister had mentioned that name a few times anyway. He can't be that important. A small smile curved at the edges of Hinata's lips. And Naruko-chan, you shouldn't call people names. She admonished her energetic friend gently. Hinata, but it's fun. Sapphire eyes streaked, sparkled mischievously through a playful pout. Even though thoroughly indoctrinated in the ways of proper etiquette and courteous behavior, Hinata couldn't really refute that. She would never be able to bring herself to being as rash and crude as her friend, but still. Naruko was obviously keen on adding something to their light banter, but, before she got the chance, something hurtled through an open window, upsetting the teacher's desk as it landed and sending the ponytailed youth sprawling on the floor. Woo, haven't done that in a while. A tangle of messy black hair bobbed up and down as the something patted itself down, sending small puffs of chalk powder drifting lazily into the air. Sure brings back memories though. Every set of eyes was glued to the figure, who by now was sporting a huge smile. An uncannily familiar one at that 1/4. So, where are the brats of Team 10? After the shock of someone suddenly throwing herself through an open room had worn off, the annoyance of their new Junin's lengthy absence still remained with Kiba and Sakura. Sasuke maintained his stony silence as always, but the slight twitch that had developed near the side of Hi's eye certainly gave away that he was nearing a breaking point. Growling, Kiba produced something that at one point had surely resembled a sturdy length of rope from the inside of his fur-lined jacket. Akamaru, barking happily, needed no further encouragement and immediately latched onto the free end to try and yank it out of his master's hands. Nei-chan, Naruko asked disbelievingly, fiddling with her hitai around her neck. Are you really our new sensei? Yup, sure. Anko laughed and placed her hands on the back of her head, leaning against the air even though she stood upright. Excuse me, someone stuttered softly behind them. After shifting slightly to see who was behind them, Anko's chocolate brown eyes closed in a happy crinkle. You're Hinata, right? Not trusting her own voice. The girl nodded fiercely, so fiercely, that the older woman wasn't so sure that Hinata's head was not in danger of snapping right off. Yeah, I remember you. I've seen you with Naruko a couple times. She told me a lot about you, you know. Chuckling, Naruko watched her friend blush furiously before she decided to help her out. Hey, Nei-chan, what are we going to do? Anko thought for a moment, rubbing her chin with her thumb. Well, let's head to the roof. Dog boy is making a racket. Loud growls and bangs followed swiftly to accentuate her statement. But where's the third kid? She asked. Oh, he's over there, Naruko informed her, waving her hand at a rather unhappy-looking boy. When Shikamaru had come to, he had tried to look invisible behind the frighteningly troublesome Junin's back. A worried frown creased the woman's brow as she stared at him with a rather dubious expression. He doesn't look like much. Shikamaru tried his best not to flinch noticeably. I can hear you, you know. He drawled as he rubbed a rather sore spot left from the fall he had endured earlier. Yeah, so, Anko deadpanned, as he stood up and moved the door, trying his best to ignore his new teacher. Hinata threw the boy sympathetic looks. Okay, you guys go up ahead, I need to talk to your teammate here. Anko told the two, putting a hand on Naruko's shoulder and effectively pinning her in place. Somewhat hesitantly, Hinata followed Shikamaru, who had already disappeared through the doorway. When she, too, was gone, the Junin grasped both of the blonde's shoulders. Right, Naruko-chan, she began grimly, locking her eyes with the girl's. I know this is going to be awkward. But when in front of your teammates, none of this, Nei-chan, business. Wah, Naruko looked puzzled. Why's that? Anko rolled her eyes. The old man suggested we'd best go for semblance of discipline. So, when we're with those other two, it's either sensei, or Anko-sensei. Naruko snorted and a smile started appearing until she noticed that Anko was actually serious. The grim set of her jaw told she was deathly serious in fact. But, no, buts. Anko took a moment to look at her sister's pouting facade. She ruffled her hair absent-mindedly. Sorry kiddo. Fine, Naruko said through gritted teeth, obviously thoroughly annoyed. Now come on, let's get going. Anko offered, pushing the girl in the small of her back before she took note of the other 3 students who still remained. Hey, why are they still waiting? She asked Naruko in a hushed tone. I don't know. Naruko looked thoughtful for a split seconds. Heba's getting really pissed though. The girl whispered back, covering her mouth with one hand. And indeed he was. No longer content with playing tug-o-war with his pet, Akamaru, the bestial boy looked positively ready to rip the classroom to shreds. Come on, let's get out of here before he gets really wild. Anko suggested as she ushered a snickering Naruko out of the classroom. That is, ushered her out of the classroom just as the girl gave Sakura the evil eye and stuck her tongue out teasingly. Despite having already gone up to the 3rd floor, it didn't prevent Hinata and Shikamaru from hearing Sakura's frenzied shrieks. What's the plan, sensei? Naruko asked innocuously, even flutterin'. Her eyelashes for added effect as she stood amidst her 2 teammates on the roof of the academy. Anko scowled. She didn't appreciate this bout of sarcasm. But just as quickly as it had come it had disappeared, and the dark-haired Junin put on a beaming smile. Right, check yourselves. All ninja gear in place. Her students nodded. Your forehead protectors wrapped securely around your 1/4, Shikamaru's was tied around his biceps. Hinata's snaked around her neck, as was Naruko's, wherever. Why did they even bother to call them forehead protectors when so many of the genin wore them wherever they please? Both butt cheeks still there. She added with a wink. If it were possible, a sweat drop the size of a melon would have appeared on the back each of the children's heads. Not really waiting for an answer, Anko turned around and pumped a fist into the air. Let's go, she proclaimed happily. But when she didn't hear the sounds of rushing shinobi behind her, she stopped dead in her tracks. Hinata started, looking thoroughly confused. What? The woman asked, her smile making way for a puzzled expression shot over her shoulder. Aren't we supposed to get to know each other better? Shikamaru finished, one eyebrow threatening to disappear into his hairline. Naruko was busy trying to stop herself from laughing out loud. Anko would surely kill the male for that. Shikamaru looked around, lost. He didn't know what was so funny. The timid girl next to him wasn't much help either. All she did was poke her fingertips against one another uselessly. Oh, Ko's excitement was ebbing away swiftly and she definitely seemed somewhat deflated now. Well, I suppose you're right. An uncomfortable silence followed, and by this time, Naruko was snorting audibly. Even Hinata couldn't suppress a smile. Sighing, Shikamaru cradled his forehead with his palm. Seeing you're our sensei, shouldn't you go first? Well, I suppose you're right. She rubbed her chin and put on a thoughtful pout, apparently mulling over what she might say. After a short pause, her smile returned tenfold. Naruko knew that smile. It was one of Anko's most deadly. Anko sat on the railing of the roof, leaning over with her elbows on her knees. The trio of youngsters took this as a sign to sit down as well, every single one of them turning their attention to their new teacher, even Shikamaru. Albeit somewhat ruefully, taking this as a cue to start, Anko began. My name is Mitarashi Anko. I like lots of things. They expected a list of normal, parental things. Like 1/4 dango. 2 of the 3 genin face faulted. And I love playing pranks. Someone stared at her rather incredulously here. One of the trio suppressed a snort. I hate snotty little brats who eat my dango. Hey, and lots of other stuff. They looked at her, expectant. My dream. The woman's eyes darkened slightly. That look Naruko had never seen before. She suddenly wanted to KN. Everything she didn't know about her sister. Enko apparently recovered and scratched the back of her head, just underneath her messy ponytail. I won't bore you with that. So she's a cruel woman who stuffs herself with dango. Shikamaru wondered, and would have been pitying himself if he even considered it worth the effort. Although, that point seemed awfully close now. Forget watchin' G clouds while lying comfortably on some grassy hill. If things were going to continue much longer, he might have to content himself by balling up into a fetal position and sucking his thumb in some dark corner of the village. Okay, you, pineapple head. The rather rude nickname shook him out of his gloomy thoughts as his appointed teacher stared at him, motioning for him to start. You go next. Expelling a gargantuan sigh, he ignored the remark about his hairstyle. It wasn't a fashion statement. He just never took the time to brush it out. If his father could look cool and unaffected by the world while wearing such a ponytail, so could he. Shikamaru resigned himself to at least make the slightest bit of effort. My name is Nara Shikamaru. I like stuff. Naruko raised her eyebrow. He caught on and explained. It's too damn troublesome to hate things. He grunted in exasperation and tilted his head back slightly, staring at the sky. My hobbies. Shugi or go I guess. And my dream is 1/4 to retire. Have a good wife who serves me drinks, and maybe have a couple of kids, or something. Well, at least he did put an effort into it, as insignificant as it may be. Enko narrowed her eyes at the black-haired boy. From the Nara clan, that means he's a lazy twit, a shadow user and, knowing what his father has told me about him, probably hates women 1/4 perfect. When the slight glare made way for what could be described as a very devious smile, Shikamaru twitched slightly. What? Oh, nothing, she replied, pointing at Hinata next. Okay, you're up. 1/4 my name is Hyuga Hinata. I'll like being friends with Naruko-chan. Eyes cast downwards, she blushed furiously as if she had something that might have upset someone. The girl in question though, gave her a playful shove and grinned broadly. I also like to study medicine and I like to cook. Don't think there's anything I'd dislike. She paused for a moment as if to steel herself for her upcoming words. My dream is to become a strong kunoichi, and to make my father proud of me. The last few words were almost spoken in a whisper, but with remarkable clarity. Nodding to herself, Enko thought about the timid girl's words but then smiled warmly at her. Obviously she has great potential. There's just something standing in the way. Me next. Me. Enko D. I didn't even have to look to know who had spoken those words. Yes, you're next, Naruko-chan. All right. A fist raised in front of her, Naruko began her rant. My name is Mitarashi Naruko. I love ramen, and I love hanging out with Hinata-chan, she's cool. Next to her, Hinata shrunk into her coat, wishing the ground would gobble her up and make her disappear. Naruko was her best friend, but sometimes she could really embarrass her. Not taking notice, the blonde girl continued energetically. I hate cheapskates who don't buy enough ramen for me, and I hate people who underestimate me. Now it was Shikamaru's turn to raise an eyebrow but he kept his thoughts unnoticed. My hobbies are training and playing pranks, he. She grinned broadly, which was mirrored by her sister perfectly. My dream is to become Hokage and protect the ones I love. Hey, good. Enko clapped her hands together and rubbed them excitedly before jumping onto the railing. Now that we're all acquainted, it's time for some fun. The three barely had time to process her words before she shouted another gleeful proclamation. Follow me. Not waiting for an answer, she backflipped over the 5-story-high roof. Into the milling crowd below. Shikamaru looked, well, the word could be, mortified, but his look of helplessness was priceless. Shrugging, Naruko placed a hand on the railing and vaulted over it. Following her sister, Hinata let a slow smile grace her features and followed suit. Releasing another gargantuan sigh, Shikamaru took the stairs. With some difficulty, they managed to follow their instructor weaving this way and that through the crowds of Konoha's populace. It wasn't until they were already halfway, that Naruko knew where they were going. It was the place she and her sister had sparred many a times before. They called it their playground, but other people generally referred to it as Training Field 5. Surrounded by a thick lining of trees, the field was somewhat secluded. But only just secluded enough so that a pair of sparring partners could practice without interruptions. A completely relaxed Anko greeted the three genin as they finally arrived. She leaned against a tree and tossed the half-finished stick of dango she was eating on the way there into oblivion. She assessed them for a moment. They were nervous, that much was clear at least. Shikamaru lagged behind. Hinata was almost out of breath. Naruto looked normal. Anko approached them slowly. Okay, now that we're here, I want to see what you guys are made of. Instantly, Naruto's features brightened. So, a little spar is in order. Anko grinned evilly and produced a pair of kunai, making it appear as if they materialized into her hands out of thin air when in fact, she had speedily snagged them out of her coat pocket. Shikamaru-kun, you're first. Don't hold back now. The boy looked at her as though she were mad. I won't. Shikamaru eyed the twirling kunai nervously. She's not serious, is she? Shaking her head, the blonde girl gave him a mournful look. She is. Hinata just stammered, her fingers poking against one another as usual. Maybe you should run, Shikamaru-kun. At that moment, the boy couldn't help but agree with Hinata's suggestion. Nearly 3 hours later, the phrases, beaten, battered and thoroughly exhausted, perfectly summed up the state of the three genin as they each went their separate ways to their homes. Hinata had sore muscles she didn't even knew existed, Naruto was nursing multiple bruises and shallow cuts. And Shikamaru sported a broken finger. Their new teacher had informed them to be in front of the academy at 7 am sharp the next day. She didn't tell them why, and not even the incessant whining from Naruto had worked. The girl didn't know why, but it really felt as if she had had to bear the brunt of the she guessed it could classify as brutal punishment that Anko had inflicted upon them. It was certainly more exhausting than her usual sparring with the older woman anyway. But for some reason, she was glad. Naruto didn't want any special favors. Besides, she didn't see or too much if it meant getting stronger faster. As the girl walked home with Anko, somewhat hampered by the massive bruise on her left thigh that flared with pain every time she took a step forwards, she reflected on the day so far. She doubted if her team could have turned out any better. Hinata, her best friend, and that lazy guy Shikamaru. As long as he didn't annoy her, she was sure they would be able to get on just fine. He was nice enough, but entirely too lazy. Maybe she would have preferred if it had been Shino instead though. Sure, the guy was really quiet, and he seemed to have a sort of obsession with what most people would consider creepy crawly things, but he seemed alright. Naruto was really curious about what Shikamaru could do though. He had gotten beaten to a pulp almost immediately, showing only an average talent for taijutsu, but it seemed like he was holding back somehow. He never used a ninjutsu, where even Hinata had threatened to use a kaiden. Naruto remembered the kaiden. And even if her friend hadn't really mastered it, she remembered it painfully. She had made the mistake of upsetting Hinata's father once. Well, she would have to think about it later. For her sister suddenly stopped when they reached one of the many crossroads in Konohagakure. What's wrong? She asked, squinting her eyes due to the glaring sun. Listen, Naruko-chan. Anko beckoned her younger sister closer. I can't go home with you today, I've got another meeting. The blonde looked crestfallen for a moment, but hid it quickly underneath an understanding smile. It's okay. Thanks, squirt. The dark-haired Junin leaned downwards and pressed her lips to the girl's forehead lightly. I'll be home soon though, don't eat dinner without me. I won't. A genuine SMI. La framed Naruko's face now as she watched Anko disappear in a blur of movement. She won't notice a few dango missing, will she? The next morning started normally enough. Normal of course being Song Iwat relative as far as the Mitarashi household was concerned. A few pieces of furniture were upturned and the glass protecting one of the many pictures that lined the walls had cracked when the frame holding it dropped on the floor. But, at least no one was hurt. Anko had left an hour earlier than Naruto, saying she needed to swing by the academy and pick up some files with information on her new students. That left the girl with a bit of free time before she would head out herself. Needless to say, she was completely bored out of her mind. It took an age before the big clock in the livy Room finally informed her that there were 10 minutes left before she would be expected in front of the academy along with Shikamaru and Hinata. And after giving her gear a final quick check, she bolted out of the house and ran as fast as she could towards the academy. When she arrived, breathless, and still with 5 minutes to spare, she had managed to knock over at least 3 carts, make tea. Old mister from the porcelain shop drop a crate full of expensive china with a loud crash, and bump into a cranky lady carrying a box filled with eggs which sent them sailing into the air to rain down on a multitude of people. Yep, all was normal in Naruko's world. Hey, Naruko nearly jumped out of her skin. What the hell do you think you're doing? She screeched, clutching her chest with her right hand. Saying hello. The disinterested tone made it clear that no other explanation would be forthcoming. Unlike Naruko, Shikamaru had strolled leisurely towards the meeting point, trying his very best not to put too much effort into it. It had been bad enough with his mother dragging him out of bed and kicking him out almost an hour early after all. Hey, the girl grumbled, still slightly miffed about the fact that the boy had managed to sneak up on her like that, even though it hadn't really been his fault. The remaining minutes passed in silence, broken only by the happy chirping of several birds in nearby trees. When it was 7 o'clock, a loud crack and a cloud of smoke heralded the arrival of Anko, broad grin included. Good morning, she greeted her 2 students energetically. You guys ready? Shikamaru nodded, albeit nearly imperceptibly. He unconsciously bent his broken now-healed finger. Naruko swung her head from side to side, clearly unsure. Where's Hinata-chan? This was indeed a rare occurrence. Normally, it was Hinata who was very punctual. As far as Naruko knew, the Hyuga had never been tardy for classes or anything else for that matter. Ah, here she comes. Anko uttered suddenly, her gaze fixed on a slouched figure getting ever closer. Hey, Naruko yelled, waving a hand wildly above her head. I'm sorry for being late, Mitarashi-sensei. The girl mumbled once she was close enough to be heard. No big deal, you were only a minute late anyway. Anko waved the girl's apology away, and at the same time cringed at the honorific use of her last name. Call me by my first name, okay. I'm not that old yet. Yes you are. Naruko's grin nearly split her face in two and immediately found herself on the receiving end of a fist on the top of her head. Alright, listen up you miserable excuses for ninja. Anko shouted, all amusement gone from her face as she towered ominously over the 3 figures in front of her. Here's the deal. Naruko perked up only a little. Living for 6 years with Mitarashi, Anko made her somewhat immune to the woman's intimidation tactics. Shikamaru likewise didn't pay too much attention, for he was sure that the law stated that Junin instructors were not allowed to truly harm their students. Pretty sure anyway, though the more time he spent with Anko, the more he was becoming singly aware that the woman had no real qualms about bending and or breaking some rules. In his case, that could be considered somewhat life-threatening. Hinata seemed to be the only one visibly affected by the Junin's words. She was 1 hair's breadth away from cowering like a frightened rabbit, and it took all of her willpower not to bolt right there and then. Consequences be damned. The 3 had been taken to a remote location. Somewhere where they had never before. It was certainly a desolate place by the looks it. It was at the edge of the great forest surrounding their village, but the ground they stood upon was dry, cracked and an uninviting beige. Several boulders, their sizes varying as much from the size of a small house to the size of a fist, littered the clearing they found themselves in. Anko's voice changed tone from rather imperious and overbearing to gleeful and severely sadistic. I'm going to hunt you down, every single one of you. She licked her lips, very nearly shivering in delight. I've set the timer for noon. Here she waved her hand lazily towards a small wooden clock that was set upon a large log next to her, placed there for some odd reason. You can avoid me any way you wish. The ones whom I don't manage to capture, pass. The genin stared at her, their minds all thinking along the lines of, is she for real? What do you mean? Naruko demanded angrily. It's quite easy really. The older woman shrugged. If I catch you, I'll tie you to this. She patted the log affectionately. And I'll kick your butt back to the academy for another year. She waited for a few seconds to let the gravity of her words sink in, and then, right on cue, fought. With eyes widened, jaw nearly hitting the ground, Naruko pointed at Anko. But, But. The Junin shifted her attention to a stammering Hinata. We passed the G graduation exam, D didn't we? Yup. Anko tucked a few strands of hair behind the back of her ear and smiled sweetly. But we can't flood our ranks with crappy shinobi. Only 3 teams will make it. So that's a fail rate of 66.7%. PFF'd. Shikamaru scoffed, seemingly unaffected by the news. I knew it couldn't have been that easy. He fidgeted from foot to foot, hands busying themselves with a jutsu in his pockets. What I mean easy? Naruto roared, mock-ing the boy wince and temporarily stop his waggling fingers. There wasn't anything easy about it, you asshole. A flare of red flashed behind her iris. Anko wondered, scratching her nose with her thumb. She didn't catch the red. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to tell her. She only curses like that when she's really upset. And you? Naruto focused on her sister once more, trembling with rage. What's the goddamned idea? Hinata reached out, trying to calm her friend, but the girl shrugged her off. A sense of dread hung in the air. The red was back, tainting the blonde's normally brilliant blue eyes. Oi, calm down now, Anko said in what she hoped was a pacifying manner, waving her hands in front of still hadn't noticed the eye color change. The trouble I went through. The girl was babbling incoherently, lost in the throes of her anger. A minuscule outline of scarlet tainted her aura, but only those bodily close would have noticed. I'm not going to go back. It was suddenly very hot and compressive in the clearing. Gasping, Hinata saw the blonde extract 2 kunai. She would have said stop, but felt compelled to draw out her own kunai. Naruto immediately leapt forwards towards her new sensei. A killing rage intently focusing on one Mitarashi Anko. Looking back, it had only taken a split second. The blur of clothing and speed. The fraction of a sec. It took for Anko to disarm her and hook her leg around her neck in an arced kick and bring her to the ground. Naruto suddenly wanted to be stronger, suddenly wanted to rise up and destroy her sibling. But immediately, the anger faded and Naruto was only squirming on the ground with her face lodged in the dirt. Hinata gasped again as her mind took in all that had happened. Shikamaru merely half-finished his jutsu preparation, leaving the jutsu a hand symbol away from completion. A deceptively calm Anko was seated on Naruto, back, pinning the girl's arms behind her head with one iron-sealed grip. Naruko-chan, she sounded disappointed. You haven't failed yet, have you? The girl coughed, refusing to look at her sister as she lay on the ground. And besides, Anko ignored her, other 2 shocked students and released Naruto, leaving her to crawl upright slowly. I didn't said we could start yet, did I? Once the young girl stood between her teammates, her cheeks aflame despite herself, she continued. You'll get a 20-minute head start. She started counting down in her mind. I suggest you make the most of it. I won't go easy on you guys and neither should you go easy on me. Naruto glared at her, hating the fact that she had been embarrassed in front of her best friend, but the dark-haired woman took it in stride. Ready? She asked. No, she questioned, after Hinata brought her hand to her trembling lip. Too bad, the 20 minutes start. Now. At that signal, Naruto grabbed a hold of the timid girl's large coat. Let's go. Nodding, Hinata turned around and vanished along with her friend. When the 2 had disappeared, Anko's eyebrow twitched dangerously. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded venomously. I give up. Hikamaru sighed and stuck his hands in his front pockets, not wanting to put any effort into today's test. There's no use for me to try and run, I'll just do it again next year. Anko's eyebrow twitched dangerously. Wrong, she roared, grabbing the boy by the base of his neck and flinging him across the clearing towards the tree line. That was not a part of the plan. Anko was supposed to say, okay, and turn around. Then he would unleash his family's very own shadow jutsu and bind her. Damn it, run, ya little twerp, or I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Shikamaru needed no further encouragement and slunk into the shadows of the trees. Survival. I give up. Shikamaru sighed and stuck his hands in his front pockets, not putting any effort into today's test. There's no use for me to try and run. I'll just do it again next year. Anko's eyebrow twitched dangerously. Wrong, she roared, grabbing the boy by the base of his neck and flinging him across the clearing towards the tree line. Run, ya little twerp. or I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Shikamaru needed no further encouragement. Nei-chan. An impatient little snort sounded just above Anko's head and she smiled slightly. Yes, Naruto-chan. Is that old man really going to let me live with you now? The 7-year-old wrapped her small arms around Anko's forehead, sneezing as the spiky ponytail brushed her nose. Instead of answering directly, the kunoichi replied with her own question. You already live with me, don't you? But he said that it was illegal. The small blonde scrunched her itching nose as she thought. Illegal, yes, the child exclaimed with breathless relief. Don't worry about that, Naruto-chan. Anko smiled, and the two lapsed into comfortable silence. Briefly, am I going to be a great ninja like you? Anko laughed. The unending stream of questions still often surprised her. She was sure that she hadn't been quite so curious when she was 7. You're going to be way better than me. Really? The tone of wonder clearly permeated the young girl's voice. Really? Anko stated with finality, shrugging her shoulders and nearly dislodging Naruto from her comfortable position. The child shrieked in surprise, which was followed quickly by a peal of giggles, something that Anko only added to seconds after it started. Naruto checked, and rechecked the trap she had just set. She had taken her older sister's advice to heart, and had now used up at least half of her arsenal of weaponry. The girl tallied the weapons she still had after rummaging through the weapons pouch strapped around her midsection. She murmured to herself. 7 kunai, 8 shuriken and no more throwing daggers. Well, I hate those anyway. Aside from that, she saw she had 2 more of the precious explosive tags, simple pieces of paper able to explode with terrific force with just a single one-handed seal. And a few smoke bombs, which she would only use to escape if she came face to face with Anko. It probably wouldn't do any good, but it was worth a try at any rate. Hinata, she beckoned her friend closer. The girl in question moved closer and crouched next to Naruto. Why yes, do you still have enough weapons and other supplies? The blonde girl raked her fingers through her hair and stood up after Hinata nodded an affirmative. Okay, we'd better split up now, alright. Hinata blinked slowly. Though slightly hesitant about possibly facing Anko alone, the woman who was supposed to start hunting them down in about 5 minutes, she and Naruto had discussed the best possibilities of making the exam. And if the two were together, they might make a bigger target. Noticing her inner conflict with the plan, Naruto took her hands and squeezed them softly. You're a great kunoichi, Hinata-chan. Probably better than me, she smiled. We'll get through this test and then we'll become the greatest nins in the whole world. The blue-haired D-girl nodded weakly in return and hid her anxiety behind another soft smile, but her friend's infectious optimism lifted her spirits considerably. Saying that she was great was one thing. But now that Hinata was all alone, she certainly didn't feel all that confident anymore. Even less than before if it were at all possible. She knew that she was probably being silly, but every time the faintest sound reached her ears, she flinched uncontrollably. With every rustle of leaves, soft buzz of insects and the random creak of tree branches, the girl expected Anko to pop up out of nowhere and attack her. The forest could sure be a scary place sometimes. Hinata huddled closer to the tree. From her vantage point here, she had an excellent view of the ground below. She was hidden completely from prying eyes within the thick crown of leaves, but they still allowed her to look outwards. At least, she thought she was. Who knew what tricks a Junin had for finding people? Even with her meager skills with the Byakugan, there was no way to be absolutely sure that she could safely hide anywhere with a bloodthirsty Junin on the prowl. The blue-haired girl checked her watch. It had been an hour since she had split up with her friend. She had no idea what Shikamaru was doing, let alone where he was, but she expected him to do the same as she was. After waiting a few more seconds, she decided it was time for another sweep with the Byakugan. Closing her eyes, Hinata went through the flurry of hand seals that would activate her family's trademark ability. When the necessary hand seals were taken care of, she whispered as softly as she could. Byakugan. Veins instantly became more prominent around the corner of her eyes. She could feel her perspectives shift as her mind recognized that she could now see all around her. She lifted her eyelids softly. Gone was the insecurity in her aquamarine eyes. Now they brimmed with power, though it was a power she didn't control perfectly, yet. Her family's bloodline limit was prized among all others, but Hinata hated it. Just because of her eyes she was expected to be the greatest and act accordingly. She was supposed to be knowledgeable in all things, and was not supposed to be scared of anything. To stand against a Hyuga meant failure. Hinata was supposed to treat every challenge presented to her as if it meant nothing. That just wasn't in her nature. Yet this wasn't the time to reflect on that. The Byakugan allowed her a 360-degree field of vision. It was impossible to sneak up on her with the ability to see through solid material and see the actual chakra pathways of objects and/or people. This was a frighteningly powerful genetic heritage indeed. Especially coupled with the Juken Taijutsu style her father was starting to teach her. Maybe she should not have been afraid of Naruto's older sister as much. She concentrated for a few moments, focusing on any movement around her. Her heart skipped a beat when a thicket rustled, but sighed in relief when it only turned out to be a deer foraging for juicy leaves to nibble on. She felt everything around her sway and move. She felt the ground beneath her move. The Byakugan might have been a mighty bloodline, but it was sensory overload to the blue-haired girl. It seemed that Anko wasn't in the area anyways, and the chakra strain of keeping up. The technique began to wear on her body already. Deactivating her ability, Hinata allowed herself to relax slightly and reached towards her back with her left hand. But where there should have been a canteen filled with water, there was now only air. What? Looking for this. The shock of hearing the voice nearly sent Hinata tumbling down towards the forest floor in a dead faint, and surprising even herself, she managed to steady herself and turn to the source of the voice. When she saw who it was, she let out a scream. Man, this blows chunks. Naruto grumbled in her mind. Really big and thick ones too. Never content with staying still for too long, she didn't know how long she would be able to and remain hidden and prevent herself from being captured. She was just itching for something to do. Just then, Hinata's scream rang clearly through the forest. Shit, she cursed. I'm coming, Hinata. Seems like those eyes of yours aren't worth much yet, huh? Anko whispered into Hinata's ear. Maybe another year at the academy will sort that out. Her tone instinctively told Hinata that she had no chance of escape. The girl trembled in fright, unable to do a thing. She squirmed fitfully and tried to kick backwards, but failed. She was caught. The older woman had effectively pinned her arms behind her back and had twisted them into an almost painful knot. She wanted to yell or to shout in frustration. She wanted to turn around and do a kaiden, a full-body spin exuding a carefully regulated amount of chakra as a measure of absolute defense, straight into the woman's face. But she wasn't strong enough yet. And if she had the proper understanding of the situation now, she would never be. It seemed as if her body and throat were not working anymore. I'm kind of disappointed though, Anko stated calmly. She might as well have been discussing the weather. I had expected more of you. Hinata squeaked as the Junin pressed herself more firmly into her back, twisting her arms even further. Better luck next time, the dark-haired Kunoichi murmured dejectedly. Hinata's trembling increased tenfold. A sharp tap at the base of the young girl's neck and all went blissfully black. Anko observed the limp form of Hyuga Hinata in her arms a moment longer, then disappeared as silently as she had come, a telltale falling of leaves the only thing that signified Anko's retreat. But just scant seconds after the Junin had whisked the unconscious girl away, Naruto bowled through a nearby briar patch, scratched and bruised after hastily making her W.I. in the direction of her best friend's cry, and came to an abrupt stop. Hinata, she called out, cupping her hands around her mouth to amplify the volume of her voice. Hinata, where are you? There was no response and that worried her. She had been sure that the yelp came from this direction so. Hinata, she screamed once more, and to her mounting horror, no reply came. All that stood in the small patch of space were some seemingly out-of-place green leaves. When Naruto swung her head from side to side to see if she could spot Hinata's hiding place, and when she was just about to call out her name again, something half-hidden in the center of the pile of leaves caught her eye and diverted her attention. She bent down and picked it up for a closer look and discovered it was a piece of paper. Who would leave a ... single quote. Naruto flipped the piece of paper over and discovered that it was a note clearly addressed to her and Shikamaru. Her name being written in jagged, fiery TTERS and Shikamaru's being written in the lovey-dovey swirls that a fangirl might use to write to a certain raven-haired Bishonen prince. The rest was definitely the messy scrawl of her big sister though. The note read, 1 down, 2 to go. Underneath was crude drawing of a chibi Anko giving her a thumbs up. And underneath that was, P.S. You might want to run. Naruko felt an eyebrow rising on its own accord. What the hell? Then something hit her. Quickly she flipped the paper over, again. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what she was holding in her hands. Oh she, already some distance away. Anko smirked deviously as she heard a faint explosion echo in the distance behind her. 2 down, 1 to go. Shikamaru shook his head sadly as he watched the singed, and slightly smoking, form of Naruko limping her way from the blast site. He smiled to match his head shaking and wondered how Naruko hadn't seen the explosive note. It was a different kind, that was to be sure, and he didn't know what Anko had done to the explosive tag. But it had sure seemed a hell of a lot more stronger than a regular one. He remained huddled in the shadows of a large oak tree, using a pile of branches and other woodland resources to give himself the perfect camouflage. Heck, it wasn't as if he hadn't done this before. People would be amazed at the effort he undertook to stay hidden from his mother at home. Where he was sure that Naruko would be teetering over and dropping to the forest floor unconscious, he witnessed her shake off a blast that he was sure would have killed him. Or at least reduced a fair few of his limbs to bloody and mangled stumps. No, scratch that, he looked at the smoldering crater Naruko had just limped out of. Definitively would have killed me. Shikamaru was astounded. There she was, just flexing her arms and legs like nothing had happened. But Naruko didn't give him any more time for inspection, as she quickly set off on a steady sprint in the direction he had seen their teacher go. His spiky ponytail swayed as he shook his head once more. Maybe he would have to get up and do something after all. This is too damn troublesome. He sighed softly, a tired expression plastered on his face as he already contemplated 1,000 different ways to help Naruko stop her insane sister. When Hinata awoke, she had lost all sense of time. What she did manage to notice right away, however, was the splitting pain in her head and neck, and her entire backside. She realized she was forced up against a large, slightly circular object. Trying to move forward, she found herself restrained effectively by several layers of rope and knotwork. Hinata let out a muffled sob when she remembered what had happened. Already she could hear the dreaded alarm clock tick tauntingly just above her head. I'm still useless. She hung her head and bit her lower lip. How was she going to explain this to her family? What would her father say? He was already angry at the placement of teams this year, and had been incensed to learn that his daughter would be placed with 2 of the lowest scoring genin in the entire academy. She thought about it longer and sighed. What would, a not-so-subtle whisper brought her train of thought to a crashing halt. I came to get you out of here. With her eyes growing wide in disbelief, Hinata craned her neck and found herself face to face with her blonde friend. Naruko-chan, she cried out. Looking horrified, Naruko clamped a hand over Hinata's mouth. Shish, she brought her index finger to her lips and narrowed her eyes. Don't be so loud. Well, that certainly was a change of pace. Naruko accusing Hinata of being too noisy. The Hyuga girl nearly broke a smile at that, but nodded quickly instead in a sign that she understood the need for silence. What are why you doing here? Hinata stammered after Naruko removed her hand and started to loosen the ropes. The blonde raised an eyebrow, momentarily pausing in her endeavors as if she couldn't believe Hinata would ask such a thing. What do you mean, what am I doing here? She bopped the blue-haired girl on the head lightly. You're my friend, you idiot. You really think I'd let you rot here? But, if she could, Hinata would be twiddling her thumbs right this moment. She sufficed for blushing rather embarrassedly. But what? Naruko mirrored in a sigh of relief as the ropes slackened enough for Hinata to crawl out from under them. Lifting her former bonds over her head and wringing her hands around her wrists in an effort to return the blood to her cramped extremities, Hinata dropped her gaze. What if Anko-sensei finds you here? Naruko paused for a moment, tapping her chin thoughtfully. She hadn't exactly thought of that. Dunno. Came the answer at length. Hinata jumped to her feet and, in a rather unprecedented behavioral pattern, stared indignantly at her friend. Why you see could fail be because of me. Keep it down. Naruto panicked and threw worried glances over her shoulders. We have to get back into the forest. Hinata whispered urgently, and, after noticing her feet were still tied firmly together with a series of complex knots, made her way to the tree line in an odd sort of bunny hop. The blonde girl's jaw dropped at her friend's strange form of gratitude. Fine. She scowled and hurried after Hinata. If that's how you want to play it. 2 seconds later, Hinata squawked in surprise as her world went upside down and she found herself staring at the dark blue which was the back of Naruto's jacket. What are you? It's faster this way, Naruto explained, and shifted slightly to accommodate the other girl's weight on her shoulder. And she was right, sort of. Before either of them even had a chance to say anything further, or even disappear amongst the trees, they found themselves confronted by someone with his trademark, in other words, extremely bored expression on his face. Shikamaru folded his arms in front of his chest as he leaned nonchalantly against the trunk of a particularly wide oak tree. Ignoring the surprised look on Naruto's face, he asked them a simple question after releasing a resigned sigh. You guys ready to hear my plan? Are y'all gonna keep running around like a bunch of headless chickens? So, why do you want to help us all of a sudden? Naruto asked, not even trying to hide the suspicion in her voice. She had learned not to trust Shikamaru thus far because he hadn't gotten off his lazy ass to help anyone yet. I'm tired of that woman insulting me, Shikamaru scoffed, his brow furrowing in a thoughtful frown as he focused his attention on a group of ants trying desperately to overcome a much larger caterpillar. It's more troublesome than anything else, and it's getting on my nerves. That's why you want to do this? The blonde girl questioned in return, one delicate eyebrow arched in surprise. Yeah, she's a Junin, and we're just rookie genin. If we work together, we might be able to beat her. He stressed the word, might, heavily, and as if remembering his one true goal in life, he corrected himself. That and I want to go back to watching clouds. Do you really think we can beat her, Shikamaru-san? Hinata swiveled her head from side to side, her eyes darting restlessly. No, not really. The boy deadpanned. Good enough for me. Naruto crouched next to Shikamaru and, grinning broadly, gave the boy a friendly, harsh, slap on the back. How about you, Hinata-chan? She asked, turning to her friend for confirmation, which she received, in the way of a frightened nod. Grimacing, Shikamaru steadied himself. The girl had nearly dislodged him from his precarious perch. It wouldn't do to tumble down the considerable height the trio found themselves on currently. Falling from a broad tree trunk some 30 feet into the air would make you likely to break the majority of your bones on impact. He forced Naruto's predictable and excited whispered banter to the background as he tried to relax. Carefully, he placed the tips of his thumbs and index fingers against their counterparts and closed his eyes. He needed to plan this carefully. Now let's see. Enko hummed thoughtfully, drumming her fingers on the insides of her thighs as she sat on the forest floor, enjoying a brief break before she would resume her search of her prey. Where is that little twerp? It surprised her quite a bit that she hadn't been able to find the Nara child yet. Then again, his father, Nara Shikoto, was lauded as an expert in stealth and camouflage. No doubt he would have passed some of his invaluable expertise to his son. Bastards. Still, Enko guessed she would be a BLE to find Shikamaru within 15 minutes without playing around. Then again, where was the fun in that? All work and no play makes super cute Enko-chan a dull girl. She thought to herself with a nod. The memories of all those missions where she would spend hours and hours hunting her targets like frightened rabbits still put a smile on her face. Nothing like a good assassination to put your mind at ease, was a saying she always held dear. Shikamaru was a boring and uncaring young fellow. So, how to make him truly afraid? Preferably, so afraid that he'd be screaming and running like a little girl to his mother while he wet his pants. Enko balanced her chin on her hands and frowned. She did have a jutsu in her arsenal that made the victim's deepest fear come to life via genjutsu. But then again the effects were rather long-term, and possibly lifelong trauma would be inflicted. Better not use that. Enko cocked her head, making her cheek rest on her hands instead. The old man would surely kill me for that. Single quote. He probably would, too. Contrary to what Shikamaru was steadily taking to heart, there was indeed a law that prohibited the use of traumatizing, severe injure. Why inducing and/or lethal techniques or training methods on their assigned future students? Damn party pooper, she grumbled ruefully. It was all relative anyway though, wasn't it? Enko certainly didn't consider a lot of things life-threatening like most people did. But of course, the third wouldn't like to see one of his precious villagers reduced to a drooling vegetable, forced to waste away the rest of his years in a nuthouse with some fellow overly saliva-enthusiastic companions. Enko could nearly cry at the thought of all the fun she missed out on due to these wimpy things called morals and decency. Bah! With renewed vigor, the Junin picked herself up from the leaf-littered ground and patted her posterior in a rather unladylike fashion to make sure she didn't take along any unwanted leafy hitchhikers. I can't scare him half to death, but at least I can beat him up a little bit. And with that pleasant thought to warm her heart comfortably, Enko continued on her RCH with a noticeable spring in her step. Shikamaru stalked through the suspiciously silent forest as quickly as he could. The back of his neck prickled and set him on edge. Deep down, he knew that Enko was looking for him. Despite all his planning, and knowing that he had put his absolute all in making sure they had the best probability of making it through this absolute hellish test, Shikamaru couldn't suppress the shudder that ran up his spine when the new number one annoyance of his life appeared without warning from behind one of the many trees surrounding him. "Hello my pretty." The woman waved cheerily and smiled broadly, and proceeded to rub her hands together with absolute relish. "How about you and me have a little fun?" she added with a wink. Shikamaru froze, then groaned as he barely got his arms up to block the incoming punch sent his way. The speed of Mitarashi Enko's movements were quite literally taking his breath away. And as he watched her rebound backwards, casually taking the measure of him, he would hazard the guess she was dancing. She eerily kept shaking her hips from side to side in any case. She would, just to spite me. He wasn't far off anyway. Enko grinned at the boy. Secretly, she applauded his efforts. But when another meaty slap of her fist hitting his forearm rang in her ears, she began to wonder how long he could keep this up. Was he holding back before? She mused, delivering a roundhouse kick that sent the genin skidding sideways. He had given in after the first punch the first time she, sparred with him. Troublesome, he muttered. Enko smiled what she thought was a disarming smile as he glared at her while wringing his already sore arms. To him, it seemed nothing other than a sneer. Not that he cared though, he didn't really care about such things. Really? Well, okay, maybe just a little. Cocking her head slightly, as if sensing something he didn't, Enko's smile widened considerably. So where are your reinforcements, pineapple head? Make that a whole lot. Damn, that woman was annoying. He knew then that now would be a good time to start the plan. Go, he screamed, and right on cue, a plethora of wild hoots and howls, strangely reminiscent of rabid wolves, resounded above their heads. Ah! Enko rubbed the underside of her nose and sniffed, casually grabbing a handful of shuriken from her weapon pouch. Now the real fun begins. With practiced ease, she flicked the metal stars into the veritable rain of Narukos that appeared from out of the treetops. A dozen distant pops and pained grunts betrayed the demise of several of the clones. Still, the rain continued to fall, along with a rising crescendo of the loud cries that Naruto was always eager to produce. Enko performed a dazzling back flip as around 20 of overzealous blondes thudded onto the ground. One, perhaps not the brightest of the lot, had landed somewhat unluckily and disappeared with the telltale sound of a muffled explosion. Shikamaru allowed himself the brief gesture of frustration by slapping his forehead with an open palm. No matter how powerful Naruto might want to prove herself by performing a Junin-level jutsu, she would indubitably prove herself a moron by screwing up somehow. And if his mother hadn't raised him properly, didn't literally threaten to bash his skull in if he dared curse, he would have uttered some colorful language now. Naruto had shrugged off the loss of the copy of herself though, and raised an erect and somewhat threatening finger towards her sister. You're going down. Snorting, the older woman waved the threat away. Instead of rambling on though, and surprising her sister with that fact, Naruto grinned impossibly wide, raising her finger even higher so it now pointed at the sky. Clones, attack! Shikamaru shook his head. Couldn't the over-energized blonde act normally for 1 second? Ya, woo, oh Kami-sama, nope, guess she couldn't. Inevitably, that trait would be handed down to the duplicates of herself. Shikamaru watched, now slightly amused, as the clones charged the Soul Junin in a headlong rush. He counted 12 clones still left, Avenue the Naruto who directed her troops imperiously. Surely Anko would have some sort of trouble with them. The next 6 seconds would prove how very wrong he really was. Anko had waited until the last moment, when the first 2 had approached her and threw their ineffective punches. Ineffective because Anko merely ducked, before slamming her own fists in their bellies. The clones looked surprised, before they exploded in a cloud of smoke. Still, the tide of blonde, blue and gray did not slow. The second set jumped forward, one aiming a kick as if trying to punt a football across a vast field, the other jumped up, feet first. As she had assumed Anko would try to dodge that by jumping up as well. The clone thought wrong. Anko launched her own kick at the first one who reached her, sending the Bunshin flying backwards and thudding back first into a nearby tree. Before that one's smoke had a chance to dissipate, the other joined in its doom in a similar fashion. The second clone let out a yelp as Anko grabbed her ankles in a fluid movement. Not pausing for a second, Anko completed her spin and literally used the clone as if she were handling an axe, launching it with the force of a bullet train into the tree trunk behind her. The remaining 8 clones did falter in their charge then. Seeing several of your identical copies being dispatched of so easily would have that effect on anyone. Anko would not grant them such a reprieve. With a look so predatory that it made the clones shiver, she dashed towards them in a burst of unbelievable speed. Shikamaru winced each time with every respective demise. The other seemingly more gruesome than the next. Naruto, her smug smile having disappeared entirely, lifted her hands in a futile fashion. Anko was already behind her, grabbing her arms and twisting them behind her back. I know you're not the real one. Anko whispered into her ear. The clone did not get the time to respond. It exploded into smoke as her face was mashed into the dirt and her neck was snapped brutally by the force of the impact. Anko rose again to her feet, wrapping her arms around her waist, literally shivering with delight. That was fun. Shikamaru wouldn't call killing copies of your own sibling fun though. In fact, he knew that the next stage could not be delayed any longer. Alright, form up, he shouted. Naruto and Hinata appeared from the greenery behind him, both halting until they stood on either side, and remained silent. Anko looked at her wayward students and uncrossed her hands from around her waist. She gave them a fiendish smile and reached inside of her coat. Shikamaru noticed, and thought that now would be a good time to begin the plan. Go, he screamed again. Naruto and Hinata became fast blurs beside him. He was already going through the hand seals before Anko calmly pulled a dango stick from her pocket. I'm not stupid, Nara, Anko stated flatly as she threw the surprisingly sharp stick at Hinata. It was too fast to see. A blur of wood, Hinata took it in the shoulder and disappeared in a poof of smoke. Naruto's cage Bunshin dissipated. And I'm not that stupid either, Naruto. The Junin raised a hand and made a one-handed seal. Something ruffled and slithered underneath her shirt sleeve and Anko abruptly called out, Senei Jashu. Hidden shadow snake hand. Shikamaru watched in horror as 4 long, coiling and interweaving dark emerald serpents erupted out of Anko's sleeve and shot into the tree to her left. All he heard was a painful yelp, and Anko casually tugged her hand to the right. Naruto fell out of the tree, ensnared by the snakes coiled around her feet, and slammed into the ground with a bone-cracking crash. Owie, she whispered. Naruto didn't get up. Anko shot Shikamaru a hooded, vaguely dark look and smiled from ear to ear. Shikamaru returned her smile as the Naruto clone she had caught exploded in a puff of smoke, and as the real Naruto came tumbling down from the tree right above her sister, he could only watch in anticipation. Good job, Shikamaru-san, was all Anko let fly from her lips before she rolled to her side and avoided her sister's rushing knee. She was fluid and graceful as she moved. The snakes became insubstantial darkness flowing out from her sleeve and covering her trail in shadows. Shikamaru saw his chance. He completed his family's jutsu. Still one hand symbol incomplete since the start of the battle, and whispered out the name, Kujmain no Jutsu. Shadow bind technique. The shadows literally lunged forward as dusky colored. Two-dimensional hands rocketing straight towards Anko. Fu. Shikamaru strained to keep the obviously powerful woman at bay. The jutsu in itself was almost useless if the opponent was far stronger than the user. And Anko was really strong. He bit his lip just as Naruko rose up and lunged towards her sister. Her fist rose and connected. Anko's face went to the side with a crack. Got ya, Naruko cried happily. Shikamaru smiled. They had passed, finally. They had landed one hit on their instructor. Finish. End. Done and over. He could go watch clouds now. Surely the hit meant no more harrowing escapes. It would mean they had outsmarted their teacher and they would not have to be chased around by her anymore. Better signal. And then Anko's shadow clone vanished into thin air. And Shikamaru found himself flying up, and up and up. Jueryoku Fuin. Sakasa. Gravity seal. Inversion. Anko stated flatly from somewhere behind the ponytailed genin. Shikamaru was about to turn and activate his clan's jutsu once more, but realized that he was suddenly floating in midair. Hang on. What the hell is this? Get me down from here, now. He struggled in the air and looked to Naruko for help. She was gawking, stunned at the fact that her sister had such a cool jutsu in her arsenal and hadn't taught her it. Suddenly, Anko was behind her sister, moving Ain in that strange mixture of both speed and fluidity, and soon had Naruko in a similar seal that sent his companion slamming into the dirt. Jueryoku Fuin. Gravity seal. Anko smiled stupidly, her eyes turning into happy curves. Neither Naruko nor Shikamaru saw the small twinge of pain that crossed her face. Holding both seals at the same time caused a strain, even on her, and if she didn't end it quick, her students might actually get the drop on her. Naruko struggled, flailing her arms and legs and trying to push herself off the ground to no avail. She was quite stuck, and Anko gloated over her little sister as she continued to try, and fail, to get up. Had enough yet? Anko edged on Naruko with a fierce, haughty smirk. Shikamaru looked to the two while floating upside down. The situation seemed hopeless. Read. Shikamaru couldn't wrap his head around the physics-defying seal, yet, and hadn't thought of a plan. Shikamaru still couldn't believe that the gravity seal seemed to keep him in place the entire time. What kind of jutsu was that to use on a test? He voiced his anger. How are you allowed to use such a high-leveled skill on us? You know we have no way to counter this. Anko stopped making funny faces at her sister just long enough to look at Shikamaru. Well, because I can, actually. Shinobi should be prepared for anything, even opponents who seem impossible to defeat. She gave him a wink, and Shikamaru frowned. That's bullshit. Naruko looked up at Anko, who only raised a slender eyebrow. What I mean, there is no one stronger than the three of us put together. We're gonna kick your ass. Naruko shouted, and, at the signal, first part anyway, a kunai whizzed from the treetops and hit the flash-bang-laden buncheon that was Nara Shikamaru. The expertly made shadow clone exploded in a magnificent brilliance that lit up the forest for miles. The sun's brightness manifested itself on the earth's ground for seconds, and, when the brightness faded, Anko stood, her position totally rigid and defensive, with one foot on top of her sister's back. She tried to blink away the pain in her eyes and found that she was temporarily blind. The foot came off, the seal faded, and Naruko stood up and smiled at her frozen sister. She laughed happily and waved to Shikamaru, who had also been hiding in the same tree Anko had leaned against, and gave him a V for victory. The nin leapt out of the tree and caused Anko to try and mimic him on the ground. Shikamaru landed on his feet, trembled once as he stood, and Naruko gave him a worried look. What's wrong, pineapple head? She sounded genuinely worried. Shikamaru bit his lip and tried to keep his hold on Anko perfect. It's nothing, really. Just that it's really hard to hold her still. Just hit her and get it over with soon, will ya? Anko smiled, and no one caught it. Yes, master. Naruko droned, sticking out her tongue, and began a languid trot forward, cracking her knuckles one by one. This was going to be too easy. Big sis had nowhere to go. She was trapped and Shika-kun had her immobilized. As she reached Anko, she smiled, whispered we win, reared back for a punch, and and found that Anko had already delivered a severe, gut-wrenching and stomach-churning blow to her stomach with her somehow freed knee seconds before Naruto could even blink and feel the pain. The blow resounded like a slap, loud and echoing and painful, and Naruto could feel her insides bursting. Her sister had hit her with chakra. Your friend needs to work on his Dao skills more. He can barely hold anyone back for long. Maybe not even at all. That could get you killed someday, sis. And Hinata listens to orders too well. She should be out here, stopping something like this from happening. Learn that the second time around. Anko whispered into her little sister's ear as Naruto buckled and hit the ground with her knees, holding her stomach with both arms. And looking down as if not believing this had happened. Naruto coughed harshly and looked up to her big sister with pearly droplets beginning to bead on her eyes. She couldn't believe that anything could hurt so bad. She couldn't believe that Anko was taking this test so seriously. Now, as she felt like vomiting up a year's worth of ramen and dango, she wanted to hurt her sister even worse. She wanted to get up and hit her so hard that she couldn't get back up and do anything about it. And when all that was said and done, when the world returned once again to its normal revolutions, a whisper of fire inside of her mind agreed. And Naruto finally realized something. Anko had really fucking hurt her. Sorry kiddo, it's how these things go. Naruto felt utterly betrayed, and knew for certain that her sister wasn't playing around anymore. Naruto fell back onto the ground still holding her stomach. The pain knocked her more than breathless. She couldn't breathe, and was soon fighting back the greedy black spikes of unconsciousness at the edges of her vision. Before Anko's fingertips gently ghosted over Naruto's eyelids and closed them, Naruto managed a resentful whisper before falling into oblivion. You bitch. Anko stood back up and looked to the shocked Shikamaru. Droplets lingered on the corner of her eyes. She wiped them away hurriedly, and pointed to the unmoving shadow user. You're going to get your subordinates killed if you use them like pawns, boy. I'm going to make you regret having to make me lay a hand on my sister. Anko burst forth in a run with such speed that it made the background seem like a complex, interwoven tapestry of blurred greenery to her. Shikamaru had no time to react. He reached behind his back and pulled out a kunai. The yoni leapt at the last second and brought her heel down on his guarding kunai. The armored sole of her sandal took the full impact of the blow. Shikamaru barely dodged away in time as Anko landed and Ost caught the side of his head with a full roundhouse to the face. Kami, this woman is trying to kill me. Remember, opponents will be faster and stronger than you. Compensate for it. Her fists came in faster than Shikamaru could count, and he felt the winds and the light taps of her fingertips against his chest and face. Shikamaru wove around the incoming blows the best he could, all the while keeping his arms up in a crossover position to shield himself. He knew that Anko could have already had him down and out in a second, but she was playing with him. Just like he predicted she would. The woman was teaching them while beating them. She was trying to instill proper shinobi teachings into them with violence so that they would stay with them forever and never be forgotten. Maru ducked over a backward spinning heel strike and rolled backwards. He saw Naruto stir, and shouted out, "We are divided, but we are still one." In the middle of the battle, as Anko took out 4 throwing knives with deadly grace, he began the hand symbols for another Kajimane. Despite the fact that his arms and shoulders would be covered in gashes in a few moments, Shikamaru had to follow through and make an opening for Hinata. Said sapphire-haired female burst from the foliage with a speed and bird-like grace that Shikamaru had never seen the girl hint at. Arms thrust behind her, body extended forward, Hinata was like a true shinobi full of speed and liquid maneuverability that normal humans just didn't have. The girl shouted as she leapt and twisted in midair. Anko looked up and frowned, the corner of her left eye twitching in volatile anger. She was temporarily caught in the damned Kajimane, again. Aren't you ever going to learn? This time though, Anko couldn't move when she tried to shake off the jutsu. Shikamaru was using every ounce of chakra and willpower he possessed to keep her glued to the spot, and Hinata was coming down too fast to be good. Hinata completed her midair twist and landed right behind Anko. She looked from Shikamaru to Naruto and caught the silent command. With the same speed of before, Hinata ran towards her unconscious friend and totally forgot about Anko. Good. At least they know that taking care of a comrade is better than completing a mission. What Anko said, though, was totally different from what she was thinking. What are you doing? You could have finished the mission and graduated. We take care of our own. Just because you have all of this power, and because you want to beat us senseless with it, Midorishi-sensei, doesn't mean that we won't fight back. As soon as Hinata is done patching up Naruto, you're going to have to deal with all three of us at the same time. The Nara child had some sort of affection in his voice now. However, to Anko it just sounded like he simply loved it when his plans began to come together. Ever tried fighting 3 hormone and adrenaline-crazed teens at the same time? Mishi. F shone behind the eyes of the normally laconic boy. Trust me, it won't be fun. Behind Anko, Hinata looked down to her friend and gently tried to shake her awake. Naruko-chan. The blonde. Murmured something incoherent and Hinata prodded her again. Naruko-chan, I need you to open your mouth. Please. She did so without complaint, and Hinata quickly popped a solider pill into Naruko's mouth. Now, can you swallow it? Quote. Naruko shook her head. No. Hinata blushed a fiery, raging red as she realized what she had to do. She reached inside of Naruko's mouth and grasped the pill, then she put it in her own mouth and chewed. Once it was made into a fine, almost gritty, wet powder, Hinata looked down to her semi-conscious friend and thought frantically about the course of action she would have to take. Please don't kill me because we need you to finish this. Naruko lay there, half dead, and watched with a sort of amused interest as Hinata kissed her to give her the powdered-up soldier pill. Inside, she felt extreme pride for her friend. But, she felt kind of creepy, too. Wasn't it wrong to kiss girls? The blonde felt life flow back into her limbs, but still, they refused to move. Anko must have done something to completely numb her body with that hit. When Hinata saw this, she simply told her to lay there and rest, still with that cherry-red face of hers. Hinata looked over to Shikamaru and waved. Naruko was okay. Shikamaru sighed and went back to trying to keep Anko perfectly caged. Okay now, Hinata, come over here and hit her so we can pass this damn test and go home. Anko gave a derisive snort of laughter. You're going trust little Miss Bluehead over there to hit me. You can barely keep me locked up. Shikamaru gave Anko a dark look, and took a step forward. Anko took 2, and again, proved that the Kajmane was pretty much useless when it came to using it on someone stronger than the user was. Hinata was in her sights, this time. The Nara boy was a one-hit pony whose jutsus she could walk right out of. Hinata was a Hyuga. She could pose a threat and that meant that she had to know that she was a threat first. Anko reached T. He startled female before Shikamaru even registered what had happened. She, while still running, reached forward with 2 fingers and whispered one of her more useful techniques again. Senei Jishu. Like before, the snakes flew from out of the sleeve of her coat like rushing tendrils of green scales. They hissed and bit and flew, intermixing with one another as they traveled to the surprised Hyuga heiress. Hinata looked back down to Naruko and then to the approaching snakes. Time slowed down. What was more important, let the snakes hit her, or let them miss and hit the unconscious Naruko? Uncharacteristic steel filled her eyes and chakra danced on her fingertips. Hinata twirled and danced and wove between the charging serpents like liquid fire. Wherever she touched, a snake would hiss briefly and disappear. She moved closer and closer to Anko, fingers gliding over scales all the while, and finally, their destructive sensei was upon her. I won't let you hurt Naruko again. Hinata cried, dainty fists and fingertips flying with speed and accuracy all Hyuga inherently possessed. Every countered and deflected blow sounded like a miniature bomb going off. Every strike Anko landed. D was a languid passing of fingertips that only made Hinata even angrier. For all she was worth, the girl still couldn't land a hit. You need to learn that you are strong. Look at yourself for strength, and then, come back and see me. If you can promise me that you will always fight like this, then you pass. Anko stated almost melodiously as she pushed away another one of Hinata's spearing finger stabs. Hinata squared herself and one of the most intricate motions of blows came thereafter. She was not going to be toyed with. Anko's punch was deflected midway through as Hinata knocked her wrists. T aside and stabbed forward with 2 glowing fingertips. At this, Enko brought down her hand and swatted that blow away, only to have Hinata turn on her heel and try to slam her across the neck with her entire forearm in a spinning arm slam. Enko ducked beneath the blow and decided to end this. If she kept this up, the Hyuga girl might carelessly injure herself, or even hurt Enko by misuse of the Juken. The places she was aiming at could be lethal if severed. Nighty Night Blue Jay, Jueryoku Fuin, Tumatsu Kanzai, Gravity Seal, Molasses Pitfall. The seal flared to life directly underneath Hinata. She slowed to a slug's pace of movement and would have been comical to watch in any other situation. The Junin stood up just as Hinata's arm whistled overhead and struck the girl on the back of the neck, knocking her out yet again. The girl crumbled to the ground in a heap and groaned in pain. Enko was getting tired of this. Maybe these kids had had enough too. Listen to this. Shikamaru came charging from behind her and leapt as if to tackle her. Enko, begrudgingly, back-flipped over the teen and caught him by the leg. She yanked and he fell to the ground as unceremoniously as possible. Shikamaru groaned into the dirt. His first plan lay in shambles and their third contingency might not work anymore. It seemed that Enko would now stop nothing short of rending the flesh from his bones and breaking his brittle defenses just for trying to attack her. Now listen, Mr. Leader Man. I'm going to tell you something, so listen up good, okay? Enko gave Shikamaru's leg a tight twist the wrong way and the boy yelped in pain. Using the same jutsu over and over again in the same way is a stupid, idiotic thing to do. True that sometimes it can work flawlessly, but if a jutsu fails once, it's bound to fail again. Use that big brain of yours and do something else for once. Shikamaru smirked and twisted over so fast that the popping of his leg out of its socket was non-existent. Better, Shikamaru asked icily as he righted himself. He cringed as he came face to face with Enko, who only looked at him in shocked disgust, and began to limp away. Enko let the misguided boy move away. He may have had succeeded in escaping her hold just then, but only truly succeeded in grossing her out. Who knew that the members of the Nara clan had such a high tolerance for pain? Hey, just because she had a strange fascination with assassinations, didn't mean she actually enjoyed people wringing their limbs out of their respective joints. So that's it, right? We all just go back to the freaking academy again, right? Just as he reached Naruto and began to set his leg back in place, Hinata managed to crawl over to him. He placed a hand on Hinata's shoulder, gently squeezing it, and nudged Naruto with the foot of his uninjured leg. Shikamaru focused again on Enko. Only after that, and with near unsettling stoicism, he awaited his judgment that the violent female might pass on to them. Enko began to trot forward and was about to tell them the meaning of this practice when fearless leader Shikamaru reached into Naruto's kunai pouch and proceeded to throw 5 kunai at her. Well, I won't let that happen. Don't these kids ever give up? Enko screamed in her mind. And wasn't he the kid who wanted to give up in the first place? Due to the glay and speed at which they had been thrown, the kunai whizzed by Enko's ear and spanked off the bark of the tree her clone had been sitting on in a dangerous ricochet. They then proceeded to bounce off 2 other trees. And when they thumped into the ground before her, Enko sighed. Well, that was pointless. She whispered to herself, and despite herself, a grin started to appear on her face. When her eyes stopped tracing the path of the kunai, she looked to the spot where the team had been and found nothing. Wait, she turned around and looked at the 5 kunai stuck in the ground. And as she took a closer look at the weaponry, the confident smirk that framed Enko's features so well, died down slowly. Son of a. That was the last she uttered, before the explosive tags, wrapped carefully around the handles. Byrne tried to move, really, but found that time was against her as a massive explosion ripped through the trees and sent debris every which way as it rode on the shockwave of the blast. Boom. Shikamaru, thoroughly beaten, bruised and bloodied, stated with something akin to pride in his voice. When the inconceivable amount of decibels that the explosion UCED died down to a faint ringing in their ears, Naruto, suddenly almost healed and vibrant, let out a whoop of excitement. Ha, you rock, Shikamaru. Yeah. Despite his lackluster response, the girls could see a smile tugging at the boy's lips. With another joyous cry, Naruto single-handedly threw herself onto the ponytailed male in a makeshift doggy pile. Hinata, for the very first time that day, allowed herself a genuine smile at the sight. You guys. Uh-oh. The blue-haired girl pointed suddenly at the clearing smoke, and the source of the incensed roar. Naruto and Shikamaru shifted their heads as well, unable to hide their fears. The trio screamed as they recognized the figure outlined in the haze. Ah, what proceeded to happen could only be classified as a massacre without any deaths. Anko slowly moved towards the three, patting her singed clothing down with all the grace she could muster. You little shits, what the hell gives you the big idea of trying to blow me up? Well, you said we were allowed to do anything to prevent you from capturing us. Shikamaru supplied helpfully with a scowl, but a kunai suddenly embedded into the log, just a few centimeters above his head. Quickly shut him up. Silence, fool. Anko roared, then waved her hands at her attire frantically. Damn it, and I just had this coat cleaned. No you didn't, Naruto stated calmly, but the fear of impending fratricide silenced her just as quickly as the boy tied up next to her. That's not the point, Anko growled angrily, her fists clenched and unclenched, for she was eager to throttle someone right about now. However, she decided on taking a deep breath, and steadied herself. Slightly. What was it with her little sister and contradicting her all the time lately anyway? If I get a blister on my beautiful, soft skin, I'm going to kill you guys. The trio, and thanking their bonds at that time for holding them up, nearly face vaulted as the true reason of her anger was revealed. What are you talking about? Be serious, Shikamaru shouted. The deep unfathomable lagoon that was his patience was rapidly being drained. He could already picture the Mitarashi siblings standing next to it with the plug and their infuriating grins. All that work and they were still caught. On his left, Hinata was just about ready to soil herself. Scenes of doom and destruction flashed across her mind. Not about the impending fail itself, but for the consequences it would have at home. What would her father say? Naruto glared at her sister. Yeah, hurry up and untie us, damn it. Oh ho 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 ho. Anko covered her mouth as she let out a dramatic laugh, staring down at the three haughtily. No way in hell, I'm going to have some fun first before I let you go. Shikamaru didn't like the way her chocolate brown eyes sparkled with that statement. Unconsciously mirroring his thought audibly was Hinata, letting out a series of half-squeaked whimpers. You don't scare me, Naruto stated gruffly, jutting out her lower lip and lifting her chin. Quite naturally, of course, Shikamaru stared at her as if she had just proclaimed herself queen of the universe with all accompanying fanfare. The only thing missing were the brass trumpets sounding a strange, mutilated version of the Konoha anthem. I've lived with her for 6 years. I can take anything she can dish out, she explained, mistakenly taking the boy's expression as one of genuine confusion. And more, Naruto added after noticing the steady rise of Anko's eyebrow. Anko grinned impossibly wide at this. Oh, is that so? Her little sister harumphed, not dignifying the question with an answer. Anko walked to Naruto and began to untie her. She then proceeded to untie Hinata and had the two face her. Anko gave them a smirk and watched both the girls share a puzzled expression. Wha? Naruto asked, still unbelieving. She was about to lunge towards her sister and call Hinata to do the same when Anko held a hand up. Naruto, tell me right now, could you ever kill Hinata? Naruto looked surprised, to say the least. What are you talking? If she became a missing nin, or if you were given a specific order to kill her, could you do so? Anko asked again. This time her voice had no emotion. Her eyes held no sympathy. No way, Hinata would never do something like that. Naruto looked to her friend, who only blushed and fidgeted where she stood. Where was Anko going with this? No one saw Anko fly through the series of hand seals that she did. They did, however, hear her shout. Jueryoku Fuin. The vermilion outline of the seal appeared underneath Naruto's feet. Anko looked towards Hinata and smiled evilly. Higamigokuro no Jutsu. Warped mind technique, she still continued. Hyun Setsuzoku no Jutsu. Fate connection technique. The trio of techniques followed each other too quickly, and suddenly Naruto felt as if she had gained 900 pounds. She slammed into the ground for the umpteenth time that day with a scream of frustration. This jutsu was beginning to wear on her nerves. However, When Naruko tried to push herself up again, strangely, she found out that she could. And did so with gusto. She hopped on her feet, fists raised and ready. Now where was her sister's face? As she looked around though, the scene that greeted her was, with lack of proper words, horrifying. Hinata stood next to Shikamaru, a kunai held up and its tip pressed directly to his jugular, and Anko seemed to have disappeared. Naruko blinked disbelievingly. What was happening? Hinata. Hinata made no response, and the kunai pressed a bit harder. Hinata, what do you think you're doing? Shikamaru swallowed unconsciously and managed a strangled whisper. She's under some sort of mind control. Naruko. Anko did some weird jutsu that linked all of our minds together and took control of Hinata's. Unless you do something fast she'll really kill me. Naruko's face went blank. Every emotion, childish or not, vanished. This was too much. She had to decide between either hurting her best friend or having her kill Shikamaru in one misguided blow. The decision seemed easy, didn't it? Stop Hinata. Stop her from hurting Shikamaru and somehow restrain her. But could Naruko even do that? Could she bring herself to knocking out her best friend and tying her up? Or even worse, the kunai pressed harder and a pinprick of blood began to form on its edge. Damn, what do I do? Naruko bit her lip. She couldn't ask Anko for help on this one. Irresponsibility rested on her shoulders alone. The kunai drew back. Hinata faltered for a moment and Naruko knew what she had to do in a millisecond. Hinata, I'm sorry, she yelled, her feet Ulrea. Dai taking her across the ground faster than she had ever ran before. The kunai came down and changed directions. It was aiming towards Hinata's heart now, and Naruko had a split second to react. She definitively couldn't reach her in time. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. Without thinking, she resorted to the only skill she thought would be of any use. The shadow clone exploded into life right beside Naruko, running at the same speed she was. They both looked at each other, steel in their sapphire eyes, and took each other's hand. The clone swung around and Naruko found herself flying forward twice as fast as she had been running before. Naruko hit Hinata like a cannonball. They both went tumbling in a mess of legs and arms and one suddenly flying kunai. The kunai embedded itself directly above Anko's head in the tree she was watching everything happen in. She deadpanned as the girls came to a stop. Definitely time to stop messing with their heads. All Naruko heard was clapping. Soft, delicate, sibilant clapping echoing in her ear. The blood rushed out of her head. She took in everything that was happening a scene at a time. She was straddling Hinata's waist, a kunai poised high and the girl's wrists clenched in one hand. Shikamaru hung limp by from the log, unmarred except for the bead of blood falling down his neck. Anko waltzed into the clearing, still clapping, and beamed at her younger sister. Good job, sis. You placed the needs of the many before the needs of the few. And you managed to save everyone. I think I will buy you that jacket you've been wanting. Anko patted her sister on the head. The blonde only nodded in half recognition of what she had just done. She was too tired. She wanted this horrible day to end. She wanted. Then something seemed to stretch too far, and snapped inside of her. Just like it had earlier that day. She would never want to place anyone in such a position. Ever. Anko was cruel to make children make such harsh decisions. Of course, the blonde didn't exactly think that. Rather, her mind was an inferno of fiery, tempestuous reds and raging, black malice. What the fuck is wrong with you? Naruko stood up in a blur of movement. Her eyes blazed crimson. Hatred flittered behind her iris like a raging hurricane held back by the smallest of walls. Anko backed away, slowly, and for the first time in her life, she knew fear of her little sister. You made me hurt my best friend. You almost made her kill someone. Naruko's fury only grew as she heard the soft sobs of Hinata beneath her. Anko waved her hands in a placating manner and suddenly smiled a wide, goofy smile. Naruko looked startled, to say the least. The rage seemed to ease out of her mind like trickling water. Her sister never smiled like that. Guess what, kiddo? You and your team pass. Morino Ibiki was less than pleased. He considered himself a nice guy. He really did, but when they asked him to interrogate a weakling like the traitor Mizuki, he tended to get a little upset. He had barely applied the thumbscrews and branding irons before the sniveling little twerp broke down into tears and spilled everything, begging for mercy. Dang it, he had really wanted to test out that new knife set that Anko had bought for him for his last birthday. Regardless, the information his impromptu confession had yielded was very interesting. As he left the damp and dark room that the traitor was assigned to, he ignored the pitiful sobs that Mizuki produced. Instead he mulled over the possibly implications the news might have. Ibiki wrung his gloved hands ruefully before dragging one across his face slowly and used the other to slam the door shut behind him. His assistants, if you could call them that, stood before him, their eyes eager and sparkling. Though one of them tried to hide it as best he could. Idiots, he grumbled. Katsu and Kushi, two possibly even scarier than Morino Ibiki himself, and without even trying. They were twins, brother and sister. Both had the same deceptively innocent face, one that someone wouldn't even notice in a milling crowd. Their horrible grins, however, would be etched forever on the minds of a large number of the unlucky people who had been sent here, down to the dungeons of Konoha. Kushi, the sister, bounced on her feet. What did you find out, Ibiki-sama? Her brother, Katsu, was scowling. He was still angry about the fact he didn't get to participate. Ibiki shouldered past them. Don't you two have something better to do? He asked. Like cleaning up that blood from the guy you were a bit too enthusiastic on yesterday. We already did that. Kushi whined. Still not pausing in his stride, Ibiki waved her off. Clean the other cells then, he said loudly before disappearing the long winding stairs that led up to the surface. Kushi, fingering her shoulder length, black hair scowled as well, mimicking her brother perfectly. Then, out of the blue, something hit her. Hey, Katsu, she nudged her sibling's shoulder, a broad grin nearly splaying her face in two. What? He growled, already turning to one of the cells to dutifully clean it. Ibiki-sama did say we needed to clean the other cells, she began. Eyes sparkling once more. Yes, her brother said slowly. Which we are going to do before he gets back. Yeah, but listen. She held up a silencing finger. We'll need to clean Mizuki-san's cell, too. An understanding smile formed on his face, and he nodded conspiratorially. Ibiki-sama was finished rather quick. Who knows what he might have done? The room might be very dirty, and it could take a long time to clean. The twins were silent for a moment, and then as one they bolted to the room that contained all of the tools of their trade. We'd better make sure